This is Stanford Engineering's The Future of Everything, and I'm your host, Russ Altman. If you're enjoying The Future of Everything, please hit follow in the app that you're listening to right now. This will guarantee that you never miss an episode and you'll never be surprised, you know what I'm going to say, by the future of anything. Today, Professor Anna Lembke will tell us that addiction can take many forms. Yes, it can be drugs or alcohol, of course, but it also can be behaviors that cause harm to our social relationships, our business and professional relationships, and even to our health. It's the future of addiction. Before we get started, please remember to follow the show so you'll get alerted to all of our episodes. You know, addiction seems to be increasing everywhere in our life. We've all heard about the opioid epidemic. We know about alcohol. We know about other drugs. But we also are now worried about addiction to social media, addiction to YouTube, addiction to behaviors that cause us pleasure. Well, it turns out that all of these addictions share a common mechanism to some extent. It's dopamine. We are addicted to dopamine, and we will do things to increase the dopamine level in our brains. The problem is, as we do those activities, it gets harder and harder to get the dopamine levels that we crave, and so we need to do those activities more and more. What's worse is if we stop those activities, the dopamine levels can go very low, and it can get us very cranky. Well, Professor Anna Lembke is a professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at Stanford University, and she's an expert at addiction of all kinds. She knows how to diagnose it, and she knows how to treat it. She'll be telling us about her own addiction and ways in which it illustrates many of the principles of how to diagnose and treat addiction. Anna, I'm sure we're going to talk about very serious, life-threatening addictions. I know you work on opioid, alcohol, many other things, but I want to start out a little bit lighter. In our common parlance, people are all the time saying, I'm addicted to YouTube. I'm addicted to social media doom scrolling. I'm addicted to my exercise. And of course, that's just a turn of phrase. But from your perspective as an addiction expert, are those really addictions, or are there elements to what they're saying that is true? Or is that just what they're saying and it's not really something that you would take seriously as an addiction expert?
Yes, yes, and yes. So basically, I mean, we do overuse and trivialize that term, and I used to joke, I'm addicted to romance novels, but it turns out I really was addicted to romance novels and I didn't see it, right?
Okay, now we're talking.
Okay,
Okay, great.
now we're getting into it. Now we're getting into it.
So tell me about that.
The romance novels
and the whole story. Yes, this sounds good.
The whole story. Okay. So yeah, I mean, so first of all, we overuse that term, we trivialize it. When we talk about addiction, we are talking about a form of psychopathology. We consider it to be a brain disease. It's a spectrum disorder, defined as the continued compulsive use of a substance or behavior despite harm to self and or others. But there's no brain scan, there's no blood test, right? We're basing this on patterns of behavior. People could disagree. And importantly, as we ourselves become addicted, we often don't see it happening, right? Other people can observe it. We're in this state of denial. As one of my patients said, denial is don't even know I'm lying. So I will use myself as an example. In my early 40s, I was turned on to romance novels for whatever reason. I hadn't discovered them earlier in life, but I'd always been a reader, escape fiction. That was my big escape. Then I read the Twilight Saga, vampire romance novels, totally got hooked on vampire romance novels, got a Kindle, became a chain reader, was reading every night, late into the morning, going to work tired, hungover, started not enjoying.
So there's the harm, because in your definition of addiction, you said there needs to be harm. And I was wondering if it was an idle and an innocent, reading habit, but you said this began to have actual measurable or harms.
Right. And the harms can be subtle, right? Like not getting enough sleep and then not being able to be your best self in the other things that you care about. The other harms in my case were not really, being present for my children and for my husband in a way that I value and that's important to me. The other harm was kind of a gradual degradation in my mood, in my interest in other things, like my interests narrowed. All I wanted to do was read romance novels, to the point where we were literally invited to a neighborhood barbecue. And I took a romance novel with me, hid it in a room at these people's house to read romance novels. Now that is really weird. That's genuinely weird.
Were you already an addiction expert?
Oh, I was already an addiction expert. I was teaching it. I was treating it. And like the low point for me, there were a couple lows, but basically I started to take romance novels to work, and in the 10 minutes between patients, because the psychotherapy hour is 50 minutes, then you have 10 minutes to
Yes.
reflect and keep it.
Downtime.
And I was reading my romance novels. So, and I didn't really see it, but I would joke about it. Oh, I'm addicted to romance novels. But really, I had become a little bit addicted to romance novels, and it was an insidious and gradual progression.
Okay, so that's a great example, and then all of us are now taking an inventory of our activities. So let's use that as an example, and
Okay.
tell me what was going on in your brain, and then of course I think people are very interested in if it's an ongoing struggle for you. Did you do cold
Right.
turkey? I think
Yeah.
people,
Right.
if you're
Right.
willing to share, I think a
Sure.
lot
Oh,
of people would be
love.
interested.
Yeah.
But tell us about
Happy
what was
to.
happening in your brain.
Okay, so now, first of all, nobody stuck a probe into my nucleus accumbens and measured dopamine levels. So we are inferring,
Right.
based on animal and human studies, what was happening in my brain. But essentially, we're always releasing dopamine at a kind of baseline tonic level. Dopamine is essential for the experience of pleasure, reward, and motivation. It's kind of like the little heartbeat of the reward center of the brain. When we do something that's pleasurable and reinforcing, we temporarily increase dopamine firing above baseline. Hey, that feels good. That gets me to want to do it again and again and again.
Does that happen in the matter of seconds or minutes? Like how long does that take?
Great question, and it's controversial. Some people think that it happens immediately, as in a matter of seconds. Other people think, especially that neuroadaptation. Well, first of all, the dopamine hit happens instantly. I mean, in a matter of certainly seconds. But what happens next is that our brains adapt to that increased firing by downregulating dopamine transmission, not just to that baseline tonic level, but actually below baseline to a dopamine deficit state, which, if we don't consume again and again, eventually levels out back to baseline tonic levels. That's what neuroscientists call homeostasis. And as you know, we're always trying to get back to homeostasis, and our brains will work very hard to achieve that. So what happens in addiction is that with repeated exposure to the same or similar reinforcing stimulus, and by the way, what's reinforcing for one person may not be for another. For me, it was romance novels and the broad category of human attachment, sex. Romance novels are in many ways socially sanctioned pornography for women. So, and over time, by the
That's a
way,
whole nother discussion, which I'm
maybe
going to
we
put
don't want to
aside.
go, maybe we want to eliminate that.
But for people who didn't understand the addiction, that last sentence is very helpful to see why it might be addictive.
Yes, right. And so what happens over time with repeated exposure is essentially our dopamine levels settle down at this in this lower subthreshold dopamine deficit state. And that's the addicted brain. Now I need more of my drug in more potent forms, not to get high and feel good, but just to bring it back up to baseline and feel normal. And when I'm not using, I'm walking around in that dopamine deficit state, experiencing the universal symptoms of withdrawal from any addictive substance, which are anxiety, irritability, insomnia, depression, and craving. And that's essentially the place that I got to with romance novels, right? I was more anxious. I was more depressed. Things that I used to enjoy were no longer enjoyable. Really important aspect of this huge opportunity costs. Other things that I wasn't doing that I valued more than reading romance novels were going by the wayside because I was reading romance novels. So that's essentially, what we can surmise was happening in our brain. Now, if you want to know the course of my trajectory, very interesting. I did not really realize I had a problem till I was interacting with a young psychiatry resident in an exercise where we're teaching them motivational interviewing, which is how to screen and intervene. So we were one student short. So I played his patient. He said, "Is there a habit you want to change?" I said, "I'd like to change my late night reading habit." He said, "Oh, tell me more about that." I did not tell him in detail what I was reading. I just said, "I'm
Right.
staying up later than I want to, I'm spending
Right.
more time, finding it's kind of compulsive." And he said, "Well, what's one thing you could do to change that?" I said, "Well, I could get rid of my Kindle or my e-reader." The point is, the next day, I could not unsee that behavior, that
Right.
conversation. And this is really important because in our therapeutic role as addiction medicine doctors, we are encouraging patients to narrate that experience. And in doing so, we get the information, but even more importantly, they get the information, right? They see that behavior when they put words to it in a way we're really not able to see when it's, hidden in the dark recesses. So the very next day, even though I was still reading romance novels, I was watching myself reading romance novels. And I thought to myself, you know what? I really do want to stop this behavior. And then I basically did with myself the same intervention we do with patients.
Did that, and I want to hear about that, but did that trainee know that this was a real thing and not something you were making up just for the purposes of the training?
So he did not know. Oh, he knew that it was a real habit for me.
He knew it was a real habit.
I think he could sense. I mean, kind of a benign. I didn't get up there and said like, I've got a problem with heroin, or like, oh, I've got a, kind of. It sounds sort of anodyne, but actually, he had no idea the extent to which that conversation actually helped to me in the long. I did tell him later because I wrote about it in my book. I told him later, and I said, you're in the book, and he's like, oh yeah, I remember that.
That is fantastic. And then so many questions. I did, but let's go right to the treatment, either your treatment or the approach to treatment. And I also wanted, because I know that at our last discussion, by the way, you're a second timer on the Future of Everything, which puts you in an elite high level group. You said that you were disappointed with the ability of healthcare professionals to detect addiction when they're interacting with patients. And it sounds like you were training this. And so maybe let's talk about that right now. How have we made progress in our ability to detect? Are you getting it out, I guess, first to other psychiatrists, but also to primary care physicians and family docs who are on the front line? How good are they at these days? And have they gotten better? And what's the prospects look like?
Huge paradigm shift in medicine, huge improvements in terms of educating our medical workforce to screen and intervene for addiction. But I can't take any credit for it, and I'm not sure any of my colleagues can either. What changed was the opioid epidemic. With the opioid epidemic, doctors had to recognize their complicity in a problem that they had previously been able to say, well, that's those people over there. All of a sudden, it was like, well, no, actually, those are our patients, and we're giving them the drugs. So that we've seen a huge sea change in the last 15 to 20 years in terms of not just the level of information and education for healthcare professionals, but also the interest. It's so wonderful. I mean, 10 years ago, I couldn't have scraped a medical student up off the sidewalk to come and rotate in my addiction clinic. It would be like, what's that? And
it's a penalty.
Right. And now they're like beating down the door. It's so awesome. Also in 2016, addiction medicine was recognized as an actual medical specialty. So there's been a lot of movement. We have a long way to go. Don't get me wrong, but it's a lot of progress.
I'm also struck by the parallel of how you articulating the romance novel issue got you to introspect. And it sounds like the medical community as a whole has articulated its problem, so to speak, with prescribing opioids, and it had a similar effect of kind of sunshine on the problem is like the first step towards Okay, so let's go back to the issue of treatment and the novel treatments, especially we're going to talk about, I'm sure we're going to talk about opioids and the physical and the medications. I don't know if there are medications for romance novel or for whatever my favorite, I really am going through my head, and there are certain YouTube channels that I know I need to stay away from because it's just a rabbit hole.
Dr. Pimple Popper?
Well, yes, exactly.
I mean, what's your poison?
My poison is there's a guy who takes apart and reassembles mechanical watches.
I love it.
And at first I called it like ASMR because it was very zen, and he doesn't talk, or he hardly talks. But now I realize that I'm seeking this out when like I have to prepare for my interview with Dr. Lemke instead. And so that is like on the border.
Love it. Yeah, so, and right after this, like people are going to go and look for that guy, right? So like there's that social contagion phenomenon too. Like, well, what you're doing that I want to do, it's really fascinating. Yeah. So, thanks for sharing that.
So no, and we could go on because the other one I'll say is that many years ago I had some health scares and I started doing exercise, and I was very aware of a low level addiction in the sense that I get extremely crabby and kind of a little bit quite cantankerous if there's anything blocking me from doing my regular kind of workout schedule. And there's the I don't know if it's a dopamine high or wherever that high comes
Yeah.
from,
Yeah.
it's real. And I get very, I needed to protect that, and I need to be very aware of how, if I don't feed that dopamine itch, I can really be kind of uh, antisocial.
Yeah, so
So,
that's a great little, sort of segue into how we treat it, because dopamine
yes.
is not only important for pleasure, reward, and motivation, it's also essential to movement. Like even the most primitive nematode
Huh.
will release dopamine in response to its food and its environment, allowing it to locomote. We know that in Parkinson's, we have a depletion of dopamine. So part of what happens in addiction, well, really how we're wired is to have to move and do a lot of physical work to get our rewards. But today we
Yes.
don't have to move, right? We can just sit there and have them come to us. So that means part of the treatment of addiction is actually getting people to reconnect their dopamine firing to their physical movement and body.
Ah.
So we actually prescribe what we call hormesis. Hormesis is Greek for to set in motion. It's actually the science of how pain is good for us. And we ask people to intentionally do things that are physically difficult, challenging, painful, or mentally, so that they can get their dopamine indirectly. So the idea is that intoxicants spike our dopamine, followed by a dopamine deficit state, which is the state of craving. But exercise, we see a gradual rise in dopamine over the latter half of the exercise. It remains elevated for hours afterwards, and then it goes back down to baseline. And it really typically doesn't go into that dopamine deficit state. But it's
Huh.
also possible to get addicted to exercise, right? If we overdo it.
So I love what you said about during the second part of exercise, because for me, as like a runner and a cyclist, it's obvious why, because when you get to the halfway point, you know it's going to end soon.
Right,
And
you're
so
almost done.
I
Yeah.
can tell my mood getting better and better as
Oh,
I
oh yes.
approach the
Oh
end
yeah.
of a run,
Oh
because I know that I'm going to be in such a great mood at the
yeah.
end.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of
You're a
course
man.
you're happy.
Yeah, you're a man after my own heart, because sometimes I'll talk to people and they're like, but I look forward to exercise. I'm like, really? You're in the lucky category. When I'm sitting, like standing by the edge of the pool in the morning, I would rather stab myself in the stomach than jump into the pool. You know what I mean? It's like, but
Yes,
within half a lap, I'm already
correct.
like, okay, it's better.
This is great. This is the future of everything with Russ Altman. More with Anna Lembke next. Welcome back to the Future of Everything. I'm Russ Altman, your host, and I'm speaking with Professor Anna Lembke from Stanford University. In the last segment, we discussed the general principles of addiction. We heard an interesting story about Anna's experience with romance novels, but we didn't get the end. So in this section, we're going to hear what happened to Anna's addiction, and we're also going to turn our attention to the opioid epidemic and get an update from Anna about how it's going and whether the future looks promising. When we last left you, you were having introspection about this and maybe not being happy with your level of romance novel reading. And tell me how it ended.
Well,
Or did it end?
yeah, good question. So, addiction is a chronic relapsing remitting disorder. And when I finally saw my double life of addiction to romance novels, I decided to do a self intervention like we do with our patients as a first pass, which is a dopamine fast, abstaining from our drug of choice for 30 days. Why 30 days? Because we find experientially that's the average amount of time it kind of takes to get out of the craving state and reset reward pathways, knowing that those first 10 to 14 days are super painful because we are in withdrawal, but then things start to get better. And so I abstained from romance novels for 30 days. I was shocked at how difficult it was for me. I had lost the art of putting myself to sleep without this particular behavior. And I had incredible insomnia, restlessness, and also just incredible anxiety. The anxiety that we get when we cannot engage in these habitual kind of protective behaviors, and especially escape behaviors. And it was intense. And boy, did it give me a whole new level of empathy for people with, severe life-threatening addictions, the people that I treat. But I was able to do it. And by the end of 4 weeks, I'm like, hey, I'm feeling great, better than I have in a long time, not craving romance novels. I think I'll give a romance novel a read this weekend. And I had something we call the abstinence violation. I binged all weekend long, went to work that Monday bleary-eyed, and I was like, oh dear, that was a disaster. I guess I have to abstain from longer. So then I committed to a year. And you know what? It was a good year. And since then, which is some decades ago, I've tried occasionally to read romance novels, and for the most part, zero pleasure. Zero
Huh.
pleasure. It's like I've burned out that neurotransmitter system. I still have euphoric recall for how it felt, and I still want to read them, but they're completely non-pleasurable for me, which is kind of the cost, right? So that's kind of, it's like I've sort of now deprived myself for the rest of my life of really enjoying that. Now I have switched to other genres. I'm like a big, mystery thriller. But even then, I have to really watch out because once I start, it's difficult for me to stop, and I don't want to
Did you
get.
do any of these other dopamine increasing activities either during that month or during that first year? Like, I mean, you talked about exercise,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
did you flirt with a different addiction that got you a little bit of dopamine on the side? Uh,
Yeah.
you
So
could
I mean,
imagine all of these
right. I
strategies.
mean, my real so that yes, so cross addiction is real. So we're giving up one addiction and going to another. I've always tried to start my day with pain. Get up, exercise, because that
Yes.
sets me up for better. For my mood just is a
Ah,
lot better. But I don't think, especially as I've aged, I haven't really been able to do more exercise. In fact, I've had to pull back.
right.
So that's sort of been a natural protector for me. Workaholism is real, right? This kind of flow state that you get into when you're working. I sometimes it's hard for me to stop working, right?
Yeah.
Which is like really weird, and it's usually detrimental. We're not present again for our families. We're not cultivating other activities and hobbies. We become sort of reliant on that to-do list and that sense of like accomplishment and validation we get. But like, at the end of my
Wow.
life, do I want to get, look back, oh, wow, I did all, no, that's not where, I know that's not where, meaning and connection is. To some extent it is, to the extent that I can be altruistic at work and support other people's careers and help patients. But a lot of it's just about my own anxiety and managing my own anxiety by chunking through this to-do list.
I think our colleagues at a medical school we're filled with people like that. Okay, I want to move to the opioid epidemic because
Mm-hmm.
it's the addiction that people are thinking about the most, and I think you would probably agree it deserves a lot of thought. But
Oh,
before
yeah.
that, just one quick question: is the idea of an addictive personality a thing?
It's a thing. We don't use that terminology anymore in the field of addiction medicine, but basically what it's talking about is somebody with a big genetic load for addiction, and that is real. People
Wow.
come into this world with differing degrees of vulnerability to addiction, some a lot more than others, just like some people are predisposed to bipolar disorder, or depression, or schizophrenia, or anxiety, what have you. We know this from family studies. If you have a biological parent or grandparent with addiction, you're at increased risk for addiction, even if raised outside of that substance using home. So that's real. The terminology we use, though, instead of the addictive personality, is more like vulnerable to the disease of addiction, or heavy genetic load for addiction, or
Yeah.
strong family history for addiction.
A little gentler and a little bit perhaps less judgmental. So good,
Well, what
good.
I would also add, which is important, is that when we think about vulnerability or innate vulnerability, it's very tied to drug of choice, which is to say, like, I'm pretty much invulnerable to alcohol. It does nothing for me. I wish it did. Caffeine, same thing. But once I discovered my drug of choice, romance novels, attachment, all those social, sex related stuff, boy, I was off and running. So we may be exploding this idea of vulnerability as we get more drugs online that more people are susceptible to.
Yes, yes. Okay, so in the last 5 minutes or so, I wanted to talk about the opioid epidemic. It had. I think you and I last spoke probably during the pandemic, maybe before the pandemic. But I think everybody has heard that the pandemic had a huge impact on the epidemic. That it is an ongoing epidemic, and as the pandemic has receded, opioids are still here. We've heard about big legal settlements, and you've made some actually very optimistic statements about doctors being more aware of their role in this. So, from your perspective as somebody who has an addiction clinic, where are we, and what is the situation with the opioid clinic, and
Right.
what should people know about it?
So I think the best way to conceptualize it through time is that there were essentially three waves. The first wave was oversupply of prescription opioids due to overprescribing, due to the hoodwinking of the medical establishment by the pharmaceutical industry. Then as prescribing started to go down, many people who were already addicted turned to illicit sources. That was heroin, approximately 2013-ish. And then fentanyl, a highly potent and lethal opioid, got introduced into the drug supply. And that's really where we still are now, where even though prescription opioid related deaths have decreased, fentanyl related deaths are still on the rise. And this is truly, truly devastating because we've got people who are seriously addicted to opioids who are seeking out fentanyl, and the sort of effect of fentanyl and the lethality of fentanyl are very closely linked. It's hard to use just the right amount to get the feeling you want without also killing yourself. But
Yeah.
on top of that, we have fake pills out there that are laced with fentanyl, and we've got people dying from a single pill, who aren't even addicted necessarily, but just sort of, got an exposure, really what some people now are referring to as poisonings rather than a quote unquote overdose. And
Are those, if I could just clarify,
yeah.
for the ones that are like, is it that those doses of fentanyl would have been okay for an experienced user who has developed a huge tolerance, but this is a novel user, a first time or second time, and that dose is way inappropriate for them and it's therefore killing them? Or
Yes. Yeah.
okay, that's the
Yeah,
situation.
yes and yes. I mean, you
Okay.
can have enough fentanyl that even for an experienced user, it would be
Yeah.
lethal. But what we're talking about mainly with these counterfeit pills, especially young people and experimentation, is that they think they're taking a Percocet, right? And that they've taken before that they
Right.
got from a doctor or whatever. But in fact, it's not a Percocet. It's got fentanyl in it,
Wow.
even a small amount. And they sort of, it slows the heart rate, slows breathing. They
Yes.
fall asleep, heart stops, and they don't wake up again.
So, is it fair to say that this is still a problem of addiction? Because now we're talking about these kind of surprise doses that are much too high and drugs that you're not really even expecting to get any fentanyl out.
It's
Does
still a
does
problem.
it start to, yeah.
Yeah, it's still a problem of addiction. It really is. I mean, this
Okay.
is a scourge of addiction and overdose deaths, but it's also a problem of access. One of the biggest risk factors for addiction is simple access to a drug of choice. If you have more access, more people use it, more people get addicted, more people die from it. There are more harms. So, especially for that vulnerable subset, who's vulnerable to addiction or has other mental health issues. So, this is a huge addiction problem, but it's also a huge supply chain problem.
So yes, good. Thank you. I wanted to clarify that. So do the principles that you outlined for treating addiction in the first half of our conversation, do they all still apply? Of course, we all know about the medications that are available, and
Right.
in reviewing your CV, you've published a lot on like what's the right schedule for taking drugs over time and how long should it go,
Right.
and
Right.
but so I know that there's a medical component to it, but are the other principles still perfectly applicable in terms of these dopamine issues and looking for other sources and all that, or does it change for
Yeah,
opioids?
yeah. I mean, the sort of the brain chemistry, the basic brain chemistry of this dopamine deficit state applies to opioids as well. A difference in treatment, though, is what we found is that many people with severe opioid addiction actually can't stop. So, the suggestion of sort of, well, just do a dopamine fast, stop for 30 days, isn't really practically possible for some people with severe opioid use disorder. We don't know why that is, but we speculate that essentially their brains may not be plastic enough to return to that baseline level of dopamine homeostasis, which means that they're always in that dopamine deficit state, no matter how long they stop using, which is a really terrible, painful state, which is why
Yes.
we use opioids to treat opioid addiction, right? That's kind of counterintuitive, but that's what methadone is. That's what buprenorphine is. These are opioids that have a very long half-life, much longer than heroin, for example, or fentanyl. So you get people out of that constant cycle of intoxication, withdrawal, drug seeking, intoxication, withdrawal. You get them in a steady state that allows them to be able to get their brains back online to be able to engage in other recovery work. So that's why we use those medications. It's not that people are getting high on them. It's that it's allowing them to restore homeostasis and kind of move on with their lives.
Great. And then in the final just few seconds, what's your sense of the outlook here? Are there reasons for? I don't want to be Pollyanna. Are there reasons to be optimistic here, or are we still only now still discovering the depth of this problem?
If we're going to talk about the future of everything, I think we're
Yes.
looking at, I think that addiction is the modern plague, and we are going to be dealing with addiction to all kinds of things, including digital media, for the next hundreds, if not thousands of years as one of the major problems that humans will face. But I am optimistic that we will figure it out because we are highly adaptive creatures and we are good problem solvers. And already now you've got people actively engaged in the discussion of like, what about social media? What about video games? What about the drugification of our food supply? Conceptualizing these things as essentially hijacking our reward pathways, depriving us or depleting our agency and our autonomy, and in essence, our freedom. And then what are we going to do about it? So I'm optimistic.
Thanks to Anna Lembke. That was the future of addiction. Thanks for tuning into this episode. We have more than 250 episodes in our archive, so you have instant access to a broad range of discussions on an amazing variety of topics. If you're enjoying the show or if you've benefited from it, please consider rating and reviewing it. A 5 would be nice, and that will help get the show out and it will help give us some feedback. You can connect with me on X or Twitter at RB Altman, and you can connect with Stanford Engineering at Stanford ENG.